Hugh founded the Brotherhood, and the Brotherhood wanted to fight.
I remember things like Sir Hugh the Undecided forming the Brotherhood of the Blade. He had already formed it by the time I entered, but it was something that, why not, a fighting order? There was a fighting order, you know, just like, you know, yes, now we have Templars and we have, you know, Hospitallers and all that, but...
Okay, Sir Hugh the Undecided got knighted. And he'd been fighting, he was very good, he'd been in Aikido, and he kind of took enough of it over. The part that was appropriate he took over. What we find is that people who have been in other martial arts sometimes think that they're going to be good at this right off. What he did was he was a warrior, but he was a thinking warrior enough that he was just good reflexes. He had a hard time guarding his legs, and you can do two things if you have a hard time guarding your legs. You can either get good at it or get good at fighting from your knees, and he chose that. Tremendously strong arm fighter, but there was very little in the south. There were the three baronies, there was some fighters, and what Hugh decided, what had happened was there was a knight, Bruno von der Eiche, way before anything was down here. He was down here, among the first, just with the two baronies, Calafia, and Angels first and then Calafia. And so he was there, and he got knighted, but then he went off to the Kingdom of the East. We had no knights down here. Henrik gave Queen Setsi, King Henrik gave Queen Setsi the ability to knight someone. He delegated the right to knight someone to her, and there were two knights that came down. I think it was an Angel's anniversary, and they knighted William of York and Christian of Orange and Hugh the Undecided. They get the three knights in January at 12th night. William Gordon of York went up and went up to the Mists Principality and stayed there. And so we had two knights. Hugh decided that he wanted more people. You get good by practicing with people, and that household up in the north, in the Mists, called Chaos, they made a lot of Western knights. They were good fighters. They taught more good fighters, and knights came out of that household. Hugh wanted that for the south. So
Brotherhood of the Blade. Okay. When I joined the SCA, there were two knights in Cade, Sir Hugh the Undecided and Sir Christian of Orange. And Sir Christian of Orange was Prince of Cade at the time, and Hugh was the leader of the Brotherhood of the Blade. And the Brotherhood of the Blade was a combat group, a fighting training group, a school of combat, and an armor's studio all in one.
Put out an advertisement saying, "Come to the Brotherhood. Come hear you this. Come to the Brotherhood of the Blade." And at the bottom, and he gave his information. And at the bottom, he was on his knees. There was a picture, a Xeroxed picture of him on his knees fighting against someone. And I saw that. The KPFK fair was one of the things with the SCA demonstrations. And I couldn't find the SCA demonstration. He kept pointing me to different people. A green-haired little short lady turned out never to be there. I mean, she wasn't there. And I caught up with William the Lucky, but I didn't have anything to write his contact information down. We didn't have computers. So I kind of focused on this advertisement, which was exactly what I wanted. wanted to get into fighting. I had heard about the SCA from Sir Bela of Eastmarch, who wrote a book called Broken Sword. And so that's where I heard about it. I've been hunting it up. And so I got in, and then I found the Brotherhood, which wasn't the Brotherhood yet. And they called up Sir Hugh, and I came to his practice, and we put on carpet armour, and I made Freon cannon helm, and put that on. And with hockey gear, I was at practicing within like 2 weeks. And then Patrick Innisfree came in. And Patrick was a natural, so he picked up his sword and he was better than I was. And Morven of Carrick come in, and he picked up a sword, and by the end of the practice he was better than I was. And then Harsha the Infidel come in, and he picked up a sword, and at least it took him like 6 practices before he was better than I was. So these guys came, we constituted the Brotherhood.
It's not quite a household because Hugh didn't want it to be a household, but we did tend to camp together at wars. We always fought together at wars. We went to Hugh's house every Sunday and spent the morning working on armor, and then put on the armor and spent the afternoon fighting, practicing our fighting. And Hugh would normally stand at one end of his backyard, and all the rest of us would line up, and the first person in line would go out and be killed by Hugh, and then we'd go to the back of the line. And then the next person would go out and be killed by Hugh, and we'd go to the back of the line. And Hugh would go through the line 3 or 4 times, and that way he got a good practice, and we all learned what we shouldn't be doing. Hugh was really marvelous. He had a great workshop with all sorts of hammers and knew how to weld. He taught some of us how to weld. I'm still wearing the steel legs that I made in Hugh's garage 39 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. And they still work. I've had to replace a few rivets, but they're basically great armor. And when I joined the SCA, most people were wearing carpet armor, and their knee protection were pieces of steel which were attached to steel greaves. So the weight from the knee protection and the steel greaves all rested on the ankle, and that made you somewhat slower on the battlefield and a little sort of lead-footed. About 6 months after I joined the SCA, Sir Hugh went up to Rieslingshire and spent a weekend with Jay Bliss, who was a master armorer who developed a lot of early patterns. And he came back with a pattern for making steel legs where the knee protection and the thigh protection were all one piece of armor. And Hugh, being an excellent metal craftsman, in one weekend built himself a pair of steel legs. And then he decided he was going to have a series of workshops with the Brotherhood of the Blade, and he gave 8 of us an opportunity to help make 10 pairs of steel legs, and we would each get a pair of legs to keep and to fight with, and he would sell the extra 2 pairs of legs to cover his costs for materials. And so Charles of Dublin, Martin the Temperate, me, and 5 other fighters spent every Sunday morning over at Hugh's shop, and we learned to cut out the patterns and to bend the pieces and how to articulate the knees, and we all ended up with our steel legs. And I tried on the pair of steel legs that Hugh had made, and because they were attached at the belt, you were not carrying the weight on the ends of your feet. You were able to move much more quickly, and they were very maneuverable, they were very nice, and they've lasted a long, long time. I've had to replace a few rivets, but that's about it. And straps, of course, leather straps. And so I got involved in the SCA. I made my first helmet I made out of 1/2-inch diameter round rebar. And because I had a neurological condition, and the first thing the neurologist asks is, have you been hit on the head? I wanted to make a helmet that would sit on my shoulders so I wouldn't be hit on the head. And I took aluminum wire and I made a framework that would fit over my head, and then I measured the lengths of the aluminum wire and went down to a surplus yard and bought 1/2-inch diameter smooth rebar and had it cut to the right lengths, and then I took it back to my apartment and bent it to shape, and then I taped the whole thing together with masking tape. And I took it to a welding shop and said, "Can you weld this everywhere where the masking tape is?" And then I covered it with 2 layers of hardware cloth and took it to the next SCA event and said, "Will this work?" And the eye slots were too far apart, but Hugh said, "Bring it by my garage Sunday morning and we'll add some pieces of steel to it and it'll work fine." So, and I used that helmet for probably 4 or 5 years. Hugh led the Brotherhood of the Blade into battle, and we trained together.
And by the time of the tourney of Union, we'd gotten some other guys as well. And we fought. Sir Hugh became champion of the Principality. Rundell made a song about it. Rundell Negricon. He made a song about it. Ballad of Sir Hugh the Undecided. That's where that came from. And we had our own bardic circles down here. We went up to Purgatorio that August, up in the west, and we showed up with 14 people. About 8 of them were fighters. 8 or 10 of them were fighters. And we made a big showing and surprised the West. They didn't know there were that many Caïdans that would come. And we fought. It was a bit tense after a while. And so we had our own bardic circle. But Baron Serbela of East March came up to that. He brought his squire, and Sir Stephen McHenry come up with him. So we had some Westerners there, and it was awesome. That was the first place that I had really sung outside of the Brotherhood. That's where they found out that I could sing, and because I only sing when I'm asked. It's kind of, most bards aren't like that. But if you provoke me, I sing. If you don't, then I don't. I'm not socialized enough. And so I sang there, and they got a bit of a surprise. And later on, I sang at their bardic circle, which was huge. And so Caïd made a good showing. And the Brotherhood was a big part of that. In that case, it was all Brotherhood people. I could go to everything. I went to everything the first 2 years I was in. I even went up to the Miss a couple of times. That was maybe, in 2 years, that was maybe 30 tourneys, or in the 20s. We just got more and more, as people wanted to do things. We went to the melee tourney. So we had a melee tourney. Robert and I went and made it up. It took 4 list mistresses. This was very complicated. But we did it. It's all different than anything you'd see. You get points for what weapons and shields you used, whether you were the captain, whether you were live or wounded on the winning team. And it was fairly complicated, but Miranda Douglas of Schehallien organized the other mistresses, and they went through it. And Hugh's philosophy was go running around. What I did was I ran around, I challenged people for me and Patrick the Mystery and Thomas the Merciless. And they ran around challenging people for me. Now it was crowned, so people weren't that willing to fight, but we did do a bunch of fighting, challenge the knights. That was the philosophy, and that's what we did. And later on, we'd become a principality of the Tourney of Union. Hugh became the champion of the principality, and Christian of Orange was the first prince. So, now at this time, the tourneys were single elimination, and so it was one and out, unless you were good enough to go on. Hugh became the second prince, and he started a war with Aidenvelt over the London Bridge.